I have a philosophy. I have a dream that software should be a joy to use and that software development and work should be fun. So one day I opened a monitoring dashboard and I saw this. This is a simple proxy server written in Ruby and it consumes 1.3 gigabytes of memory. And I thought, no, this cannot be right. This app is so simple, there could not be a memory leak. Many people suffer from similar problems. Why could even the simplest of Ruby apps suffer from memory bloats? This is a really puzzling question that has haunted people for a long time. Now, because of the research I've done lately, I know where memory bloat comes from. And I know that there are solutions. But these solutions are cumbersome to deploy, which is why relatively few people use them. I'm a big proponent of democratization. This term means to make something accessible to everyone. When there is a benefit, it brings me joy if I can make that benefit available to everyone. So I am on a mission to allow everyone to easily get rid of Ruby memory bloat. Welcome to this talk, Democratizing the Fight Against Ruby Memory Bloat. And I'm Hongli. I founded Fusion and I am the author of Passenger. There were all sorts of rumors about why Ruby memory bloat happens. One rumor is that it is caused by memory fragmentation. This means that garbage collector compaction will help. I have actually found that fragmentation is not the biggest problem. Sorry about that. Hay fever. Other rumors say that it is related to multi-threading and that tuning the system allocator will help. Well, this has some truth in it. A while ago, I researched the actual cause of Ruby memory bloat, and I found that it is mostly due to the system's memory allocator, and not due to Ruby. It is a problem that mostly occurs on Linux, not on other platforms. And also, it is a problem that mostly occurs in combination with multi-threading. So, for example, Puma is much more affected than Unicorn. I saw in synthetic tests that up to 90% of memory usage was not attributed to Ruby, but to something else. 90%, that's a really staggering number. How is this possible? It is because the operating system's memory allocator rarely releases memory back to the kernel. It likes to keep freed memory around in order to make future memory allocations faster. This strategy is optimized for big hardware enterprise workloads, but it is not suitable for most Ruby apps. The problem is magnified in multi-threaded apps. The more threads and virtual CPUs that you have, the bigger the potential for bloat. So to learn more about exactly why bloating occurs, please go to my website, Joyful Bike Shedding, or search for my article, What Causes Ruby Memory Bloat. That article has a video accompanied that describes in detail exactly what is going on. And at the end of this talk, you will find a link to my website. This talk right now is not about the cause of memory bloat, but about the solutions. There are roughly 3 ways to solve memory bloat. 1, you could set a magic environment variable. Or number 2, you could have the Ruby garbage collector call an API called malloc_trim. Or 3, you could swap out the memory allocator used by Ruby altogether and replace whatever memory allocator it uses by default on an operating system with a custom one called JE_malloc, which is a memory allocator that is very efficient and does not exhibit all these memory bloating issues. However, neither malloc-trim nor JE-malloc are currently integrated in upstream Ruby. And the rationale by upstream is that this issue is fairly operating system specific and also use case specific. So a question arises, should a solution even be included in upstream? Now, for many users, this question may be a bit puzzling because so many of us care about this problem. But to the upstream developers, it makes some sense because they have to care about more than just server use cases on Linux. Anyway, the reality right now is if you want to get rid of Ruby memory bloat, then you need to patch and recompile Ruby yourself. So this brings us to the route to democratization. We have solutions for the memory bloat problem, but they are cumbersome to deploy. They are not available to everyone. This situation is not joyful. And that made me wonder, how do we democratize this so that everyone can enjoy the benefits? Maybe we could learn from past lessons. I began using Ruby in 2007. Back then, I also did not like the fact that my Ruby app servers used so much memory. I wanted to apply a trick called pre-forking to save memory. Pre-forking is nowadays mature technology supported by all major app servers, such as Passenger, Unicorn, and Puma. It could save about 33% memory. Back then, it did not work because the Ruby garbage collector was not copy-on-write friendly. And copy-on-write friendly meant that every time a garbage collection happens, the way the garbage collector worked basically undid all the memory optimizations that was made possible by pre-forking. So in order to fix that, I dived into the Ruby source code and made it copyright friendly. I then published my patches and wrote a number of blog posts. So even back then, I also wanted to democratize this benefit because just having a bunch of patches lying around on a blog is not enough to really get people to enjoy this benefit. Ruby did not merge this feature for years and years, and I wanted people to benefit much sooner. So I launched a Ruby fork called Ruby Enterprise Edition. Now look at this retrograde design. It brings back so much memories. The name of this product was tongue-in-cheek because it made fun of the meme back then that Ruby and Rails were not ready for the enterprise. But Ruby Enterprise Edition was actually an open source product. So Ruby Enterprise Edition was very successful and was used by many people for years, until finally Ruby merged in the feature themselves. So time travel back to 2021. Maybe we can pull off the same strategy again. This time, we could supply pre-compiled, easy to install Ruby binaries that have memory allocation patches included. Enter Fullstaq Ruby. I launched this project shortly after publishing my research on where Ruby memory bloat comes from. Fullstaq Ruby is a server-oriented Ruby distribution. It includes malloc-trim and JE-malloc. You can choose. It focuses on x86-64 Linux on the server. It provides pre-built Debian and RPM packages for multiple Ruby versions and multiple distributions, so that you can install it easily on servers and in containers. It also integrates on RBM, and as a bonus, it allows auto-updating tiny Ruby versions. This allows you to easily keep up with Ruby security patches, So this is unlike when, for example, you use RVM on the server, then every time a tiny Ruby version is released, you need to install that tiny Ruby version and then migrate over all your gems. What we do is we allow you to install, for example, Ruby 2.7 or Ruby 3.0, and we take care of upgrading that to the latest tiny version for you. Then you don't have to worry about changing paths or reinstalling all your gems. So this is not a fork; it is a distribution with some relatively minor patches applied, and it is really focused on a server use case. So because the upstream developers, they are hesitant about optimizing too much for specific use cases, I thought, well, we could do it for them. We can make a choice. We can choose to optimize for one use case, a very important use case, that is. But but just providing a distribution like this only solves one half of the problem. The other half is a temporal problem. My long history with open source has taught me something. A truly democratized project must be both healthy and sustainable. If I look at my past open source projects, then one of the challenges they face is that they rely too much on myself, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of expertise. For an open source project to be healthy and sustainable, it must not rely on a single person. I think that the answer lies in the usage of four pillars. One is automation, two is community, three is knowledge sharing, and four is active recruitment. I will explain what these pillars mean because I also try to apply them on Fullstaq Ruby. Automation um, is necessary because maintaining open source projects is already hard and time consuming enough. You guys might have read a recent blog post by Sonic. I think that was his username, the author of Virtus, and he reflected back on 10 years of open source, and he kind of concluded that it is a lot of work, especially the more open source projects that you join, even if it is just maintenance work, fixing bugs, responding to issues, it is still a lot of work, especially when you get older and you have more responsibilities in life, maybe kids. It just gets harder and harder. And so we should invest in automation as much as possible. For example, investing in a good CI/CD pipeline. All project processes should be codified, and the code should be the canonical source of truth about the processes. There should be as few manual processes as possible. If you do all of this, then this makes maintenance much more efficient and scalable, as well as less error prone. Community means you should make yourself redundant as soon as possible. You should hand over as much power as possible to people in the community. And be inclusive so that as many people can participate as possible. When you can go on an extended holiday while the project keeps running, then you have achieved your goal. The project should not need you. Knowledge sharing. This pillar means that this pillar is necessary because New contributors may not have sufficient expertise or sufficient knowledge of the project's design to be able to contribute efficiently. So invest in knowledge sharing. Teach contributors the skills they need. Document as much as you can so that anyone can learn what they need to contribute. Document design concepts, processes, caveats in order to reduce contribution friction. And also active recruitment. Contributors and maintainers come and go, including yourself. This is a fact of life. Rather than fight it, you should embrace it. Your projects should actively recruit at all times. Make sure to keep a healthy maintainer and contributor pool. Make sure that everything every role does can be handed over to someone else with minimal friction. Now take Fullstaq Ruby as an example in which I apply these 4 pillars. The release process of Fullstaq Ruby is very complicated. It builds about 120 different packages across 6 supported Linux distributions, 4 Ruby versions, and 3 memory allocator variants. The CI/CD pipeline consists of more than 300 jobs. If you look at GitHub Actions, then the pipeline graph does not even fit in the visualization, and it takes about an hour to run. This sort of release process is totally impossible to manage manually. So pretty early on, we have fully automated our release process, which is not easy because our pipeline is also very complicated. We had to work around all sorts of GitHub Actions limitations, which makes the pipeline even more complicated and even more in need of being documented. There are well-established processes for common maintenance tasks, such as adding a new Ruby version. Here is an example of someone who contributed Ruby 3.01 support. We have a document called How to Add a New Ruby Version. The document says basically edit this configuration file and change those numbers. So the contributor did, and then he sent a pull request. The CI then took care of the entire release process. It took very little work from both me and him. We have a comprehensive development handbook which documents all the important design and architecture aspects, as well as all processes and responsibilities. Everything from how the build pipeline works to important caveats in the build processes, to how to add support for a new distribution and how to test things locally is documented. We document a clear way of working for team members, and we define what all the responsibilities are. So with this sort of documentation, we make it not only easy and clear for core team members to join, but also for more casual contributors to easily add value to the project, to easily fix any maintenance issues without too much input from the current core maintainers. I have once blogged about my long-term vision for Fullstaq Ruby. My vision is for it to become an official part of the Ruby project. Now that would be the ultimate democratization, because then really everybody can benefit. So in conclusion, to fight Ruby memory bloat, it is not enough to address the problem directly. Every problem lives inside a much bigger domain, that of availability. I believe that software should be a joy to use, and that software development and work should be fun. It is not joyful when only a small number of people can enjoy a benefit. Until a solution is democratized, it is not concrete for most people. It is no better than an abstract idea. If you also publish software solutions, you may want to take a moment and wonder, how do you make your solutions available to everyone? How do you democratize the solutions? How, how do you keep your projects healthy and sustainable? I am Hongli. Keep up the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Hongilai. Do we have any questions? We do have some time for question. We have about 10 minutes until we start the break, and then at 7:05, we're going to do the breakout sessions, and then at 7:35 we have the. Anyone who wants to ask questions, we have about 10 minutes.
I have a question. What's the stance of Ruby core maintainers on having some of these features behind some runtime flags?
They do not. I do not sense a lot of real interest. So it's kind of like they are. My interpretation is that they would rather not have feature flags like that. It's either completely in Ruby as an officially supported thing, or, or not at all. So it's not entirely clear what it is. It seems that they are hesitant about making a decision on this.
Right. I remember reading the conversation around JE malloc, and I think one of the biggest concerns was the project going to vendor JE malloc, or if it was going to create an external dependency, how they were going to manage that changes to that project, etc. Right? That was one of the concerns. But for trim, it might be simpler, right?
Yeah, for trim, it might be simpler. For JE malloc, the situation is actually even more complicated on that, because the only JE malloc version 3 is good at solving the memory bloat problem. JE malloc version 5 performs way worse, and it is not entirely clear why. It is on my long to-do list to one day investigate the differences between 3 and 5 to see where the issues come from. Maybe we can fix that. But until then, saying that, yeah, we should be able to use JE malloc, but only version 3, that just doesn't sound good to anybody. And especially Linux distributions will hate you when you vendor JE malloc 3 when they have version 5 installed. So that just makes the problem much more complicated.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but for Fullstaq Ruby, we don't have that problem, and we just made a decision. Are we going to include does it need JE malloc 3 in order to perform optimally? Okay, let's do that. It doesn't matter what the Linux distributions think, because we are a third-party package provider.
Makes sense.